Welcome.
Okay.
Welcome. I forgot to ask, am I allowed to say what you teach and what school you teach at?
Absolutely. Go for it.
Okay. Welcome to Kevin Miller, who teaches grade 7 and 8 music at Earl Grey Public School. What do they call it? Earl Grey Middle School?
It's a senior public school.
Senior Public School in Toronto, Ontario. How's that going this year?
It's been going great. I mean, we had a bit of a hiccup back in March, but we're getting through. It's been good, actually. It's been good for me. I've been learning a lot. So
In terms of the virtual sort of
virtual learning, yeah.
we spent a fair bit of time today trying to set things up so that we could co-host this, and it's tricky. It's tricky. I have a lot more learning to do with the live streaming, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Me too.
So we're going to show off a little bit of video game music technique, I guess, for some of the more adaptive or interactive soundtrack scores. And I'm showing off a demo that I made. I feel like it was probably back around the time a lot of your students were born. I should say my video game experience is not necessarily current generation. I left the industry in 2007, so yeah, probably half of the grade 7s were born after I left the industry, I think. But around that time, I made a demo of some of the adaptive music techniques that we were actually using in a real life published video game. It's a very simple demo, but it's got some real world game audio techniques. So shall I launch it, or is there anything else you wanted to say before I dive in?
No, let's launch it and we'll see if there's what comes up when we go through it.
Okay, should I talk over it on the first playthrough or just sort of show it?
Let's just show it and then we'll talk over it a little bit.
We'll see how far I get.
All right.
Maybe we can zoom in on the screen later because this is not a huge video game. The blue dot is the hero. Oh, they're running away. I forgot I wasn't going to talk over the first one. There's no like stop button. There's a README that goes with this, which says basically, it's not a real video game. It's a music demo. So there are a lot of things that are kind of unfinished in it.
Right.
So, Kevin, I guess you saw a video of a playthrough that I made many years ago of that probably, and then just watched me play through. Did you have any sort of initial sort of thoughts or?
Well, the first thing that strikes me is the actual music itself. Your choice of music based on. I mean, it's funny. I'm not used to seeing, and I suspect a lot of people aren't used to seeing a very intense soundtrack going with such a simple game. So that's the first thing that kind of really struck me when I saw it.
Yeah, it's that raises an interesting point, and stop me if this goes off too far on a tangent. But terms of there are different video game aesthetics. In general, not just around soundtracks, where this is sort of my personal feeling. Like when I think about game music and how it's approached and what's done with it, there's a toy aesthetic, and where you're playing with a thing, right? Platformers, Tetris, Mr. Pointy, it's not like playing, say, I don't know, this might be dating myself, but like Halo. I mean, historically it's a top franchise, right? Sorry, I'm broadcasting from the kitchen. So there are games like most kind of action titles or first-person shooter titles, where it's supposed to be telling a dramatic cinematic story, where there's a lot of emotional investment in the scene. To me, there's a big difference in how you'd approach scoring like a toy game, where it's interactive and I'm playing with this thing, but it's not. I'm not. How to put it? Not meant to have the sort of cinematic experience of like. When I play a Star Wars title, I want to feel like I'm in the movie, basically, and have that. Oh, things are intense, or things are moving, or winning, or trouble, sort of stuff. So it's interesting because it was the cinematic experience that I had in mind for the adaptive demo, and it's that kind of experience that in the game I was working on at the time, that they wanted to really involve the player emotionally in what was going on screen. And people just from an early age have internalized sort of the emotional language of cinema and action and drama, right? There's a bit of a disconnect there. On the other hand, it's interesting because those tracks almost could have been dropped into the game that I'd been working on, right? One of the things I wanted to kind of show is that, and I don't know if you had this experience, but that the music does draw you in emotionally to the story of these dots, right? And
you definitely, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
Oh no, please.
No, I was just saying you definitely start to sympathize with Mr. Pointy in the situation, in the plight of being attacked by, this horde of red Mr. Pointies.
One of the things that was, I knew the game design of Mr. Pointy, obviously. I went in, there was one programmer, no sort of art budget, no time. The focus was on doing a music demo. And so I knew that there was no finish line for Mr. Pointy. It's only every time, you know, Mr. Pointy succeeds in deceiving a foe, more foes just come. So it's not a, it was never going to be a happy tune. Right?
Yeah. No, it's true.
So
It really does.
that.
Yeah.
I wanted to talk a little bit about how it works as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so maybe we can bring the graphs up again. And I wish there were pause and volume buttons for this, but there really aren't.
Yeah.
But maybe I'll talk over it a little bit. And it's an old project. I'm not sure what I did with the source control, so I'm guessing a little bit what some of the algorithms are.
Yeah.
Algorithms for I don't know. Your kids might be familiar with what an algorithm is, but it's basically piece of code logic. So
yep.
Computer language logic. And it's interesting that when it's hard to get away from someone having to write some little pieces of code if you're going to score a video game. Because when does the trouble channel fade in and how quickly isn't something that a composer can yet directly control. So there's some logic management that's involved with attaching these things to a video game.
Right. And that's because of the fact that the video game is controlled by someone. It's controlled by the controller, so it has to. Or not controlled, but the player is controlling the character. So you have to adjust. The audio has to be adaptive to what the player is doing, as opposed to being fixed in time like a movie.
That's the whole idea, right? We don't want the triumph cue to kick in when Mr. Pointy's just been grievously injured, right?
Yeah.
We don't want the music to be super intense when Mr. Pointy's hiding in the corner, right? Is the idea, is that what's happening with the music matches the emotion on screen. And you can't really predict how things are going to go on screen. Yeah. So the approach that was taken for Mr. Pointy was to have music that's pretty sparse, that's always going, that's setting some general tone for the level, and is, well, we can hear other things starting to happen. Setting a general tone for level and doing things like harmonic, basically setting the chord changes. So there's a basic melody going on.
Yeah.
Musical stuff happening with not a lot of kind of dramatic content going on. See, all the lines are flat now. Those are actually the volume levels of some different tracks that will fade in along with to complement the main music track. So
are they all running? So are they all the audio of each one of those tracks is running at all times, and you're just it's fading. The video game is fading in and out.
Yep. The treble track there is I guess the horn section.
Yeah.
Which is mostly in the right channel. And when he's got his point pointed at Mr. Pointy, that's when trouble starts to happen, right?
Okay.
And if I get behind him, there should be less of that. So you're not necessarily going to pick up on that consciously. But the idea is, I'm threatened. It literally sounds different in the soundtrack. Here I am.
Yeah. So you feel you're meant to feel the music more than actually hear it.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't. We've got these graphs here, so because it's a demo, so people can see what's going on. But I don't really want them to be thinking about is the music fading in now. Just sort of how it feels. It's like over here, I'm doing okay. Here we're threatening each other. I don't know if you can kind of hear. There's a distorted guitar part. That gray line. Oops. Which is it's a nice guitar chord there. I've got a red dot in my sights. So two things can be happening at once. I could be in trouble because he's pointing at me, and my electric guitar stuff can be happening. I've got kind of a low electric guitar just because of the way things composed. What else? So there's the action bar down at the bottom. I didn't talk about it all, but that's basically, it's just percussion. And it's, are there a bunch of bad guys down there? But there's just, you know, it's more activity in the soundtrack if there's more stuff in proximity. There's also the injury. Slowed down. I don't think I can get glory before the song ends, which involves being on a bit of a streak of hitting multiple enemies at a time. Let's see what I can do. I have a feeling the song is about to end, and I didn't loop it in the demo. I think we need to hear glory, right?
Yeah.
Okay, I'll try and
blast through.
Yeah, blast through. Find a couple bad guys, enough bad guys to on screen to get a streak. There's that guitar crunching away.
Yeah.
Because it's a 3.5 minute track, and there is kind of a musical direction to it. You know, like an intro, and then sort of like, I guess, a first thing here.
Yeah.
These other tracks all change as well. So it's got sort of a chunky guitar riff in this part, but at the beginning it was something nice. So it's just a synth line, which is just supposed to be sort of triumphant winning on a streak, sort of.
So does the audio for the glory, is there a track going right from the very beginning, or did you so it's not even, it's like extra stuff that you didn't even have to, it's just sitting there because there, I mean, I suppose there'd be no way to get a glory within the first probably 5 seconds of gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, in theory, say Mr. Pointy was an epic 12-hour adventure.
Right.
In theory, if I were doing the sound design for it, I wouldn't necessarily want to start level 1 with the same song every time, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
If they're all designed with the same, using the same parameters and approach, they could be kind of interchangeable, right? And then the other thing is, if it takes the person 15 minutes to finish the level, when tune number 1 ends, tune number 2 could start, and they could be right in the middle of a streak, right? So, but you're right. It's maybe a little bit of wasted effort.
No, but I totally. It's a nice demonstrative point for my students from the standpoint that like it actually pays off to do that extra work, even though it's not going to necessarily be seen. You know that it's there, and if someone, for instance, somehow found a way to break the game and get a streak, you know, get that glory, the glory should be there, then you know,
there it is.
Exactly. You never know who's going to be looking at your stuff.
Well, your students can download it if they want, in fact.
Okay.
And play it, and they can drop their own music in if they these are the stems here.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see if you can hear this.
So, and can you just define stems for my students?
So, good question. It's used more in remixing, where if someone's remixing someone else's tune, they don't want the MP3. They want the multi-track version of the song. so that they can replace the drums, or they can replace their replace the keyboards, or take bits and pieces, take the vocal part, take the bass part, do their own thing with it, which you can't really do with an MP3, right? I mean, people forever have been, making amazing remixes from records, right? But if you're in a remix culture, or working with video games, people will often want submixes. So, and I have all the stems here. So we have different stems for different moods in the game. I have all the stems here in Adobe Audition, which is a sound editing program. It's not usually a music program, but I guess the thing I could show you here, first of all, can you hear this?
No. Oh, yeah, there it is. Okay, yeah, I can hear it. Good.
So that's not a terrible level for you?
No, that's fine.
Oops, what did I do? So one thing that's interesting about this particular approach is that if I have everything turned on at once, it's kind of unlistenable. It's very busy.
Yeah.
So this is like a piece of music that was never designed to be listened to all at once. And in the gameplay, there are moments where everything is happening.
Yeah.
But they're short moments.
Yeah.
It's dramatically appropriate. It's just too much.
Yeah.
To me, this is. To me, as a composer, like that doesn't sound like the start of a piece of music.
No.
That's the beginning of the music material. If you start all the stems at once, it has the glory theme, and we can solo some of these to get an idea of what they sound like.
Yeah.
So
sure.
right off the top, there's. Here's our, this is an attacking more than rage, I would say.
Right.
They're the bad guys in the scope. Oops, this is everything again. There's our horn section for something's got you in its sights.
Right.
Basically, are there enemies nearby? And on its own, this for me doesn't work either. And neither do really most of them.
Yeah.
So there's the baseline track, which is here's a musical structure, a basic musical structure.
Yeah.
That is more sort of background music-y. And then there's just all this other compatible material that comes in and out.
At any point, any one of these could be faded in or out.
Yeah. I tried to put musical limits on them. Like the game doesn't do this. It's if suddenly I kill the bad guy, he's no longer going to be in front of me, so there would no longer be an attack soundtrack playing. But I put some logic to that. Oh no, when this thing turns off, it fades out. It doesn't just flip off.
Yeah.
That's how it works.
Cool. Yeah, because my initial impression when you showed me the demo initially, looking at it, I thought what was happening was that they were individual tracks that were being triggered by the event, So not that the volume was being triggered, but the actual track was being triggered, so that you had shorter pieces of music. But this is equally interesting, an equally interesting way to tackle the problem.
That is that's a viable approach.
Mm-hmm.
Um, a lot of people have worked on good ways to do that over the years, so that if instead of fading in some treble elements on top of a normal track, you would queue up your treble track and switch to it, right?
Yeah.
A big problem with that is latency,
Right.
because it's not likely to happen at a musically appropriate time. If my theme is 16 bars long, right, for introducing the level, music sometimes, once upon a time I wrote a paper about this, music is a little bit like language, where you have problems communicating things if you stop halfway through a sentence.
Yeah.
If I just started another paragraph there, it's like, what's going on?
Yeah.
And that's very noticeable. If you interrupt things in music, for me, there are really dramatically appropriate times to do it, like the classic film record scratch.
Yeah.
Like the song is playing and then record scratch because something is interrupted, right? So there are musically appropriate interruption moments, I guess. But often the approach that I've taken, I like to describe it as changing the tone. So you can deliver the same content in a different way, and it really changes the tone. Do you hear that?
Yeah.
The same text can be delivered. I'm not going to shout in the mic because I don't want to hurt anyone's ears. But exactly the same text can be delivered in different ways, right? And communicate a very different emotion, as anyone who's done a play knows, right?
Yes.
So that when I was trying to make things really dynamic, my idea was to have the musical kind of text be sort of understated and have its own structure, just have its own structural integrity, and have all the dynamic stuff not depend on that structure at all. I think you were saying with your class you're doing like a call and response, like sort of theme and reply thing.
Yeah, that's the idea that we're gonna be going off of.
So that's a musical structure, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're switching from one kid's composition to another kid's composition, does it still make sense if the first call doesn't get its response, right? Or if the response gets cut off, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
The end. But yeah, it's interesting. That's
yes, yeah.
That's exactly. It's a real, that's what you were talking about is a real approach. A lot of people have invested a lot of time into it.
Mm-hmm.
And in my opinion, it's a great complementary approach as well.
Yeah.
Like there's no reason where you couldn't be stitching together, this part of the level definitely needs this music. And when you go to the next part, it's got to switch to this other piece of music, and figuring out structurally. So then if they spend a long time in the first part, is the first part of the music allowed to repeat? And if it does, do I try to introduce variation so it's not too boring? And then when they get to the next part, how am I going to transition it? And then you start like composing a piece of music in space, right?
Yeah.
Or this is sort of composed. I mean, structurally it's just linear, right? But in terms of the music design, it's composed around events, and some of it's in space. How close are the bad guys? Yeah, it's really interesting. But you could have both things going on,
Yeah.
Um,
I suppose that's kind of how sound effects would work within a game. You would have them cued by a specific action.
unless it's the sound of your car engine.
Yes, exactly. Yes, of course. So I
Just,
guess it would depend on, yeah, it would depend on the,
I could talk for an hour about that as well. I wanted to finish this thought on, you and your class can download this and play with it
cool.
by swapping in your own MP3s in the stems folder.
Okay.
And just making sure they have the same names as these. And unfortunately, it doesn't loop, which is sad, because if the kids are doing a call and response, it would be cool if it just looped while they were playing the game. It doesn't do that yet. Maybe if I dig up the source, I can add something like that. But if you just replace the normal track with whatever song, and replace the other tracks with 3 minutes of silence, I guess. I think you could just have a single track going, and you could start playing with, well, what would an action track sound like with my normal track?
Cool. Yeah. All right. So we'll. I don't know if we're gonna have time. Time is so limited for us right now, but I don't know if we're gonna have time for the end of the year to get to that. But it's definitely an option. And yeah, if I can get my hands on those files, I'll definitely make use of them.
We'll put them in the link.
Thank you.
And what else? Oh, I wanted to show you a game that I worked on.
Yeah.
That uses a very similar technique. So. Well, it uses the same technique in the sense that it's through composed. The song structure goes from beginning to end. It's a 3 to 5 minute track, and it has all these complementary stems that do different things. And it doesn't have graphs on screen for what's fading in when. But maybe I'll be able to remember and identify some of the things that are going on. I know that
good listening exercise for my kids too. Okay. See where they can hear where these things are coming in.
Oh, do I talk over it or not now?
Leave it maybe for just the beginning, and then maybe talk over. I don't know, whatever you feel is probably pointing stuff out is probably better because they don't have that visual there.
All right. This is menu screen music.
Yep, I can hear it.
So I think that boost triggered the more high intensity beats.
Yeah.
Or that could just be the first place sound. There's going to be a lot of boost. Takedown definitely triggered. Less intensity here.
Yeah.
The strings are when someone's on your tail. That's definitely the boost.
Yeah.
The rapid
Greater
percussion.
numbers don't
Yeah.
taste. This is good.
That went by quickly.
Yeah, it certainly did.
So definitely with the takedown, there was definitely a takedown. Either, I don't know if that was, so I can't remember some of the stuff, but so I remember some of the stuff we talked about and then hooking the things up. I didn't compose the music for the game. I composed the music for Mr. Pointy.
Yeah.
The video game music was by, I think, I'll have to check. I'll make sure I put it in the comment. I think it was Witchman working with Rom DePrisco on Full Auto 2 Battle Lines. So it wasn't just one composer even. It was,
Okay.
Here's a bass track and what sort of elements can we add to this track to make it, have that takedown, or I'm damaging someone, or someone's behind me, or I'm in the lead, sort of stuff. Yeah, I can't remember what all the algorithms were.
But it never, when I see something like this, and anytime, I mean, in my life, just generally, but even especially with music, with video game music, or even with movie music, it never ceases to amaze me how much is actually going on at the same time. If you really stop and even just tune out what's happening with visually and just listen to the audio, there's so much going on.
This game was really notorious for that because stuff is breaking.
Yeah.
Cars everywhere, skidding, driving, crashing, shooting, explosions. The audio was a bit unreasonable, really.
Yeah.
Most games either have the shooting or the racing, right?
Yeah.
And
there's a lot going on.
Yeah, we could have a whole conversation about the car engine.
Yeah. So, but just from a more like just a general question about this, would all of the sounds that we heard be dealt with in the same way, where they'd be faded in or out in this game, or would we be dealing with several different systems for that audio?
Different systems.
Different systems. Okay.
Yep. So the music would be streaming. It's 5 synchronized streams, and then just fading based on the logic.
Okay.
Car engines are loops. But I don't want to get too sidetracked into the car engine system. The car engine system was sophisticated because you can't. A car engine goes from, say, idling, and maybe you're not idling too much in a game like this, but you're shifting and stuff, and so easily goes from 1500 RPM to racing cars 8,000 RPM. That's a really big pitch shift if you're just handling it with pitch shifts.
Yeah.
So there were a bunch of different engine samples and crossfades and pitch shifts, and so that the pitch shift wasn't unreasonable, and then that was a whole other thing too.
Yeah.
And yeah, this one of the simple ones is the gunshot, fire and forget, explosions. Sort of, it's triggered at this position. Play it and you're done. So yeah, there's single shots, loops, really complicated loops like the engine loop. Yeah.
Oh, that's it. Yeah, it's impressive. It's impressive the amount of work that go into these, just on the audio level alone, let alone on the coding level.
Well, and so I did work on this game.
Amazing.
As an audio programmer.
Yeah.
So I was writing.
Oh, okay.
The algorithms of how do we, and tools for the audio designers to plug in their content into the engine simulator and set the data, and then how do we get that data into the game, and then I wrote a lot of code.
Yeah, so you're writing code to attach the audio to different things.
Yeah.
In a sense.
Yeah. Yep.
Okay. Neat.
And I should remember more of the game logic. I'm gonna guess at some of the things we did for the action music. I know we did. So we had usually guitar tracks associated with damaging things. And the more damage you did in a row, the more the guitar track was going, which is I think why in this level it was stuff kicked in when there was a takedown.
Right.
And the other thing, I'm not hearing it that well, but I know we also had, we were able to, I wasn't able to do this in Flash for Mr. Pointy, but we were able to modify some of the tracks. So I think it was a more a muted guitar track, just with filter effects. And then we would open up the filter for the big takedowns and more damage. I know we had, we did released two titles within 12 months. So I get them mixed up a little bit as well. But we had, we did have like a Triumph sort of glory track for when you were way out in front, which it might have been replaced with the boost track, because I definitely heard a boost track on this. I feel like there's trouble when there's people on your tail. There's action when people are close, because there was that moment where there was kind of no one around, and things sort of calmed down a little bit.
Yeah.
I don't know. Do we want to run this one more time? Again, I can drop the link of this.
Yeah.
This is just some random person's playthrough of it.
If you could include a link, then my kids can. If you include the link, and they can watch it on their own and try and hear where all these things you're talking about are coming in and out.
Okay.
Right.
Anything else you want to touch on briefly? We went fairly long. Thanks for your time on this.
I think that's a ton, and I'll have my students watch this, and if they have any questions, we can maybe do this again next week sometime, and get some of those questions answered.
Sounds good.
All right. Thank you so much for your time, Andrew.
My pleasure. I love talking about this stuff.
Yeah, absolutely.
Normally it's hidden behind the scenes.
Yeah, it truly is.